Good morning and welcome to the January 26th meeting of the Committee of Special Populations. We are excited to talk about our topic today. On July 14th, for a little background information, on July 14th of 2020, the board directed the superintendent to hire an outside expert to examine achievement data for students receiving English language development and Hispanic Latino students. As with most things, the pandemic made the work harder, particularly gathering stakeholder input, as I'm sure we can all imagine. However, we did continue to persevere and persist through this. So anyways, the school system contracted with the Center for Applied Linguistics, CAL, and they issued a report on December 15th of 2022. This is such an important topic because the number of our students requiring English language development services continues to increase every year, as you know. And they now comprise the largest single racial and ethnical student group in the school system. That's just a little introduction. I'm going to allow, on what we're talking about today, I'm going to allow my colleague to introduce herself. And I'm Rebecca Spondrowski, Committee Chair, and I represent District 2.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Julie Yang, District 3.
Before we begin, I want to approve our, I just want to say, Ms. Harris is on her way. She got a little detained this morning, but I just wanted to check and see if you had any comments, questions, or concerns in reference to our previous minutes.
No.
Okay. Okay. So with that, then, I will turn it over to, I was going to say Nikki, Ms. Hazel, sorry.
I'm Nikki, yes. Okay. Thank you. Nikki Hazel, Associate Superintendent in the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs, here with part of our team today. But this is our second time coming to you this school year to talk about some of the topics happening in curriculum and instructional programs. We were here in the fall to talk about gifted programming in Title I schools. And so today we come to talk about our emergent multilingual learners and how we are programming for them. And so we will hear from our consultants who did an evaluation. That will be the bulk of what we do today. And then we will also talk about our gifted and talented update that we want to share. So if you can go to, actually click 2 slides for us, please. Thank you. So we are, actually one more. We are going to just talk a little bit. You did hear some background about how we got here. And so I'll share a little bit more about that. And then we will hear from the Center for Applied Linguistics and talk about some of the next steps that we have as we work through their report. And then we'll have a time for discussion. Okay? Next slide, please. So as was already stated, the board did direct the superintendent to issue a request for a consultant to evaluate programming in our district for our emergent multilingual learners and our Latino students. And we did go through a couple of RFPs before we were able to contract with the Center for Applied Linguistics. And they have been really great partners with us. And we are actually, some of us are just meeting each other in person with lots of Zooming. So it's been nice to see the real life person. And so they will be sharing with us today the process they used to collect their information and their findings, and also they will share their recommendations for how we can improve the overall performance of our students in the district. So at this time, before we get started, I am just going to have folks at the table introduce themselves. Some of us are MCPS, some are from Cal, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning. Good morning. Buenos dias. I'm Vicki Parkan. I am the acting director for the Department of English Learners and Multilingual Education, which is a mouthful, DELME. I'm happy to be here.
Good morning. My name is Tamara Hewlett. I am the Elementary English Language Development Supervisor. Good morning. My name is Dr. Kira Ballantyne. I am the Vice President for Programs and Development at the Center for Applied Linguistics, and I was the director of this evaluation study.
Good morning. My name is Maribel Marrero Colon. I am the Associate Director of Professional Development for the Center for Applied Linguistics, and I was part of Kira's team. I'm really excited that I got to be part of the whole thing, as well as visit your wonderful schools.
Oh, thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Peggy McLeod, and I'm a consultant working with Cal on this project. I've been working on it since the very beginning, and it's just great to be here and seeing the sort of the capstone presentation.
Yes.
And I'm Sandra Blotner, the secondary ELD supervisor, bringing up the tail end of this team. So thank you, everyone.
Should I have our staff also introduce yourselves quickly, if that's okay?
Good morning, I'm Lori Christina Webb. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Board of Education.
Juan Ramos, as Administrative Assistant.
All right, well, thank you. Good.
And I just want to acknowledge, we do have Dr. Peggy Pugh, our Chief of Curriculum.
Academic officer?
Chief Academic Officer,
Yes.
excuse me. And we have lots of folks from our Delmay team
Yep.
who are here that serve in a variety of capacities, and they have been working with Cal and do a great job working with our students in the classrooms. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and get started.
All right, next.
I was gonna say, always the mic.
I always think my voice is loud enough that it carries. Good morning. Can we go to the next slide? Before we get into the presentation, we just wanted to give you a little background about who our emergent multilingual learners, EMLs, are. So you can see here, and you mentioned already, we are the largest group in Montgomery County. We currently, the students comprise, the program has over 30,000 students. And we started the year with approximately 28,000. So just in this school year, our program has grown by over 2,000, and it continues to grow as students continue to arrive, most of them going through our international student office before they are assigned into our program. You can see here, again, the majority of our students are in the elementary schools. We have a group, of course, in middle and high school. We also have some students that are within the program are also assigned to our METS program in the secondary schools. In elementary, we now refer to them as our SLIFE students with limited or interrupted formal education. They're the same students. It's just we have the different terms. The difference also is in the elementary schools, they are at their home schools, whereas in the secondary, we have the METS programs that they are assigned to based on, where they live. We also have a number of students that you can see on this chart, the yellows are the parent refusals, so students that have been identified as needing English language services, but parents are opting for them not to be in the program. They are still required by state regulations to be assessed yearly, so they count in our numbers because they do have to test out. That's the goal is, with the yearly testing that they would eventually test out, but they're not receiving services at this time. Next slide shows, again, just a little more background by grade level where our students are. We have 4 levels of students in our program. So beginning are the English language proficiency or ELP 1s, all the way to level 4. You see the bulk of the ELP 1s in kindergarten, first grade when they first enter our school system. We also see a big influx in 9th grade. which we will get to, some of that with graduations and the impact of when they're coming. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ballantyne, who will share their findings from their study.
All right, thank you so much, Vicki. So we have, I think, a separate slide presentation with Cal's presentation. Is it the next slide? Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, maybe we can jump ahead to the first. Let's do the third one. Here. But before we get into this, I just want to start out by thanking the Montgomery Board of Education Committee for Special Populations for inviting us here today to share our findings with you. I want to thank the Delmay team. We've been in the thick of it working with them for pretty much 10 months of last year. We had weekly meetings with this group, and thank you all for your wonderful support in helping us understand, this school system, get into schools, talk to folks, find the documentation, just to thank you for your support and being such wonderful partners to work with. So as you led off in your introduction, our purpose for this project is to examine emergent multilingual and Latino student engagement and achievement in Montgomery County Public Schools to understand instructional practices, accountability and program models, and linguistic and racial equity. And if we could have the next slide, please. Just a little bit about CAL, about who we are, the Center for Applied Linguistics. We're a nonprofit organization based out of Washington, D.C. We have 60-plus years of experience, and we are a mission-focused nonprofit. Our mission is to promote language learning and cultural understanding by serving as a trusted source for research, resources, and policy analysis. And our areas of impact include professional development, evaluation, research, assessment for K through 12 and adult language learners, both in the United States and abroad. And so we're very pleased to be able to work with you all on the work that you're doing in your system. Can I have the next slide, please? Just some words of acknowledgement for our team. So Maribel and Peggy, Margaret McLeod introduced herself. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Igone Artegoitia, who unfortunately had a prior engagement. She's delivering professional development today. She's our expert in dual language. Mr. Ali Ahmadi, who did all of the wonderful behind the scenes work, getting our folks into schools, very patiently emailing back and forth to make that happen. Lindsay Massoud, who is our qualitative research analyst, and our classroom observation team, Jenny Doherty, Sarah Harrington, Ann Hangerer, Kathy Kenoy, and Sean Slack, who did all of the groundwork of going in and actually doing school observation work. May I have the next slide, please? So I want to start out just by giving you a little bit of information about how we approached this work, what our framework looked like, and just talking about how we did all of our data collection. And so I'm going to talk about three parts of that. First of all, the Stakeholder Commission, which was something that was directed for us to do in the RFP that we responded to. I want to talk a little about the guiding framework that we used to approach kind of the large quantity of different kinds of data from different parts of the system that we looked at, and then briefly just talk to you about, like, how did we put it all together? How do we do that workflow? So if I may have the next slide, please. So the first step here in our work was to work with what we call our Stakeholder Commission. And Delmay supported us in identifying and bringing together that commission. And so we started out with about 40 individuals identified by Delmay who were invited to the first meeting. And of those, we had about 28 participants. And they were a broad range of professional backgrounds. So the commission included elementary and secondary teachers, both English language development and also general education or content ed teachers. It included principals, paraeducators, administrators, parent and community members, and other MCPS staff. And we did a little snapshot just to see the representativeness of that group of folks. It included members of the MCEA, MCAAP, and SEIU. And you can see some of the demographic breakdown. About 30% of the commission members were Black or African American, 37% Latino, 41% white. Those don't add up to 100 because people have more than one category that they might belong to. And we asked folks about their language background, and 63% of them said that they spoke Spanish at home or in their classroom. If I could have the next slide, please. We had four, that's coming up a little funny, but I think you can read it. We had 4 meetings of this stakeholder. So they were sort of our steering committee, right? They were the folks that helped us understand where to look, who to speak to, what questions we might think about. We had 4 meetings of that committee, 2 in the spring and 2 in the fall. And the first meeting we really used to have them support our data collection plan. What are the places in the system we should look? What questions should we ask? Who should we speak to? At their second meeting, we brought that data collection plan back to them and had them refine it, comment on it, provide us, more support and information there. We also collected some information on some family and community groups that we should reach out to, and they were very supportive in that aspect. The output then from that second meeting was that we had a data collection plan. We went in and we collected our data, we did analysis, we produced our initial report. So you'll see there's a little bit of a gap between that April 28th meeting and the September 20th meeting. That's because we were out there actually gathering and analyzing and so forth.
Can I interrupt you for one?
Of course.
Of the stakeholders, I noticed there's no students. Is that, it may be in here later and I.
Yeah, no, we didn't have student stakeholders in that group. No, that's correct. Yeah.
Why not? Yeah.
Why not? I think.
Since they're the ultimate stakeholder.
Sure. The Stakeholder Commission, when we were working to pull that group together, it was some DELME recommendations. I would have to think back on why we didn't work to include students there. I don't know if you all have.
We should have. It wasn't a part of the charge, but we should have included them.
Yeah.
There was a list of participants in the resolution that we must include. We should have included students, though.
Okay.
And we did have some students participate in our focus groups. That we had some voices in there later. Yeah, that's a good point, though. So yeah, we met again in the fall for a review of initial recommendations, and those initial recommendations were prior to our completing our classroom observation. So they saw some of the recommendations and not all of them. Some of the findings and not all of them because we were still in the midst of data collection and analysis. And then they met again at the beginning of December to review and also prioritize our final recommendations. And if I could have the next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the framework that we brought to our approach because we wanted to look broadly across sort of the whole experience of EML and Latino students in the system. And so we developed a framework with 8 areas of inquiry, and there are a few guiding documents that we used to support building out that framework. So the first one was the MCPS scope of work, which had a set of sort of research and practice lenses built into it. And then 2 other documents that we aligned ourselves with, and the first is a U.S. Department of Education Office of English Language Acquisition publication called the English Learner Toolkit for State and Local Educational Agencies. It's a very practical guide on the kinds of things that local education agencies, should attend to. And then the second one is a recent publication from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine entitled Monitoring Educational Equity. So we used those to kind of guide us to make sure that we didn't have gaps in what we were looking at. And so if I could have the next slide, please. Here is how we organized the framework for our report, for our approach, and you'll see this in the full report. We have chapters on each of these elements. So we looked at achievement, outcomes, and opportunities, and we very deliberately put pair outcomes and opportunities, because we know that if a student doesn't have an opportunity for learning, then they don't get there towards that outcome. So thinking about those being paired together. Instructional methods and program models, and we include two-way immersion in this chapter here. It was important to us, it's important to sort of Cal's philosophy of doing work, that we bring an assets-based approach to multicultural and multilingual students. So we really start off our work being grounded in what those students bring to the table, what they can do, what their cultural funds of knowledge are. We looked at both the assets of the educators in the system and the supports that educators might need. We looked at college and career transitions, including the Career Readiness Education Academy in that section. We looked at newcomer students and students with limited or interrupted formal education, SLIFE, that acronym that Vicki referred to earlier, including students in the METS program. We also included a section on EML students with disabilities and a section on family engagement. So that's kind of the bones of how we started looking at things, and we kept that through, and you'll see that as a through line in our final report. If I could have the next slide, please. I can talk now a little bit about what our data collection looked like. Who did we speak to? What kinds of data did we collect? So we conducted 18 distinct focus groups from May 2022 through October 2022. They included 99 total participants, and those included educators, administrators, students, family, and community members in those focus groups. We conducted 2 surveys. The first of these was an educator survey, online only. We had a total of 888 participants who responded, and you can see the full report has more detail about those respondents there, a little bit more about their backgrounds. But they included classroom teachers, they included special education teachers, paraprofessionals. We had really great representation from paraprofessionals in our survey. About 10% of the respondents were paraprofessionals, which was really nice to see. And then administrators at all levels, principals, district level. We also ran a family and community survey, which we ran in both paper and online format. And we provided that in 8 languages. And we did our first initial outreach there at the September Back to School Fair. So we actually did it in person, handing out the paper copies of the survey, and then we followed up with an electronic
Can I
format.
ask,
Yes, please go ahead.
for your data collection of focus group
Yes.
with students and your family and community survey, do you have a demographic breakdown of who participated?
We did not collect demographic data. We have a breakdown of the different languages that folks responded to the survey in. Okay. We also asked, one of the things that we were thoughtful about was ensuring that the survey was delivered to families who are either current or parents of current or former English learner students. And so we asked that question. Are you currently, is your student currently an English learner or previously was? Right. And we did get good representation. And we actually looked, we don't include this in the final report because the results there wasn't any result there. We looked to see if there were any distinct differences between the responses. If you took out the group that said they weren't current parents of parents of current or former English learners. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have a group of respondents who weren't families of that group and who were skewing the result. And so we did look to see, and there wasn't a huge difference. So we just used the whole group.
Right. Of our EML learners, emerging English learners, 75%, I think roughly, are our Latino students, but there are also 25% are students from all different backgrounds. Yes. So for me, I would be interested to know whether these focus groups are represented
Represented.
in that regard.
For the student focus groups, I'm the one who conducted the student focus groups. We did have a representation of, I would say, about 90% Latino students, whether they were current ELD students, former who had already passed and were being monitored. We had students who were general education Spanish speakers who were attending general education and had never been identified as ELD students. We had students from CREA. Actually, we had a large number of students from CREA, but we also had, I think it was 2 Chinese speakers, and several other languages like Arabic, Amharic, and Karen. And so we did have, they were invited to be part of the group, so I would say about 90% were Spanish speakers and about 10% others, because they were one or the others. And we also had native English speakers who were never identified as ELD, who were not. We had 2.
That's included in the 10% of others.
They are in the 10% of others. It was native English speakers who were, generally they would be identified as white.
Peggy, do you want to talk, there was
The community.
a parent and community group that you did where you had a Chinese language interpreter as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, I held 2 family parent focus groups. We had in the spring we had 3 parents who were part of a small group who came in for a focus group, and then we did several focus groups meetings. As I recall, 5 of the focus group meeting, 5 of the parents were Chinese, and then we had a mother who spoke Romanian, and then the rest were Spanish speakers.
And that's 436. Is that what?
No, these are the focus groups. These are smaller. This is a much smaller number. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Ms. Hazel, did you?
Just a reminder, though, for this particular study, it was for Latino and all of our students who receive services. So most of the, I think, focus was on our Latino students for this particular study.
Right.
And Tamara is quick on the ball here and found the numbers, thank you. But for the family and community survey, we did have an ethnicity question. We had 19% of respondents identified as Asian. We had 42 responded as Latino in that family community.
Yeah, Ms. Harris has a question as well.
Yes.
This backs up just a bit, and I do appreciate that there is a specific enumeration here of our newcomer students with limited or interrupted formal education. In your framework for approach, and you listed some, kind of areas of inquiry aligned. I'm wondering, so in 2022, the UNICEF came out with a report on strategies to improve community services for newcomer students, unaccompanied children arriving in the U.S. has a very strong public school focus. Did you all look at that report when you
We
were?
did not. We did look at the, there's a U.S. Department of Education newcomer toolkit document, but thank you for that one.
Yep.
I'm just taking a note there.
I have a clarifying question. In your focus group or your family community survey engagement with students, are there any students with EML with disabilities or EML students that have interrupted?
So we didn't ask students that classification question about themselves. We do have evidence that in our classroom observations that we have students with disabilities. We didn't collect specific demographic data about the students in the classrooms that we observed because it wasn't part of our research permissions to do that. But we do know that from just conversations with the teachers that there were definitely students in those categories in those classrooms. So it wasn't part of a formal data collection because there are particular logistical challenges with asking kids those questions.
Right.
Yeah.
The students who volunteered for the focus groups, none of them identified themselves as having a disability, but we did have quite a few of those students were from CREA, and most of those CREA students came from the METS program. So they were most probably at one point identified SLIFE, but when they entered the CREA program, their classification changed.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. May I have the next slide, please? So I spoke about the focus groups. I spoke about the surveys. We also did probably the biggest piece of data collection was our classroom observations. So we conducted a total of 358 observations across 60 schools. That included 43 elementary schools, 9 middle schools, and 7 high schools. We also included 1 special school in that observation, and we have some detail in our full report about our sample collection methodology of how we selected these particular schools and the methods that we used for the classroom observation. We had conversations and interviews with a variety of MCPS central office staff. Oftentimes, these were folks who the stakeholder commission suggested, speak to somebody in the international admissions office, speak to somebody in the special educations office. So we sort of got those pointers of where to think about the distribution of responsibility for the different, aspects and characteristics of these students across the system. We also reviewed internal and external MCPS documents, websites, handbooks, and we included some quantitative data review. And that data includes data that was provided by MCPS, as well as data that's available on MCPS's website and data on the Maryland State Department of Education website specific to Montgomery County Public Schools.
Do you mind if I ask which was the special school?
Which was the special school. We told them that we would not disclose.
Oh, that's
yeah,
fine.
that was part of our.
I'm really asking because I wanted to know if any of the kids were involved in the career and technology educational programs, or CTE.
At the special school, I don't believe so.
Well, at any of the schools, but that's fine.
Oh, at the I'm trying to remember.
It's likely.
It's likely, yeah, yeah. But we did actually, so part of going into schools was communicating with educators that we were not there to evaluate their performance as educators. Right. We were there to conduct the evaluation, and so we were very explicit that we don't disclose the names of the educators or the names of the schools. It's an aggregate picture. So.
I just wanted to make sure that we incorporated some of our career pathways.
Yes,
as well.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. If I could have the next slide, please. So this was a pretty extensive set of data collection that we did. And so what you're getting today is it's a kind of a snapshot of our findings. But as I'm sure you've seen, we have a full research report. We have in-depth and qualitative and quantitative analysis organized around those 8 areas. And then we have a summary of key findings and recommendations for each of those 8 areas. For just the purposes of fitting into the allotted time, today what I'm going to do is synthesize across those key findings because there are a lot of recommendations in there. And so, we don't have time to go through all of them, but our stakeholder commission did review the full set of findings and recommendations at their last meeting. If I could have the next slide. So what I want to sort of structure us around then in the findings piece is, first of all, I just want to provide some background and context. So this is a little bit of like the quantitative snapshot. So building on what Vicki shared with us earlier. And then there are kind of 4 syntheses of our central findings that I want to bring to you all. So the first one of these is that we found that nurturing relationships and a welcoming environment are really critical for student engagement and academic success. We found that responsibility for emergent multilingual students needs to be shared across all educators in the system. that sufficient resources must be allocated to support EML students' language acquisition, content learning, and socio-emotional needs, so the whole child, not just the language piece. And then that transparent accountability feedback loops are needed to make sure that resources are allocated and policies are implemented. So let me start out, if I could have the next slide. I just want to talk a little bit about some contextual data. So forgive me if you know this. I wasn't sure what all background folks would have, and I know that Vicki talked a little bit about this. But so this is school year 21-22 data. Because our investigation went from the beginning of 2022 through the end, we have data from different school years, depending on when we made the data ask. Our rule of thumb was, please give us the most recent relevant data that you can provide to us. And so we get the big picture, but there are some nuances in that data collection, and I'll speak to them when those are relevant. But this is 21-22 school data, so it's a little different from the data that Vicki just presented. But in that school year, more than 28,000 students were emergent multilingual learners, and that's 18% of the school population. 52,854 students were Latino. That's 1/3 of the school population, and then most of those EML students are Latina. If I could have the next slide. And then you can just see that in table form. And just something that's worth pointing out here is that number and proportion of EML students is highest in the elementary school, so about 26%. More than a quarter of elementary school students are identified as EML, and that reduces across the students' lifespan in the schools because students are reclassified. So a student who might enter kindergarten as an EML student may no longer be an EML student by the time they get to middle school. This is a common national pattern. Of course, your ethnicity doesn't change across your life in the same way, and so you see, the number of Latino students is pretty steady, about 1/3 of students, no matter whether you're looking at elementary, middle, or high school. If I could have the next slide, please. And then this is just a little bit of the distribution of students by their EML level. So you can see at the elementary school level, you have most of the students at level 1 or level 2. They're beginning. They're just starting to come in to the school system. By the middle school level, you see students more proficient. And then at high school, you get new students coming in. And so you kind of see a different patterning. This is, pretty standard. You see this across the country, that there are differences there. If I could have the next slide. So we looked, first of all, to, what does the academic achievement of Latino and EML students look like? This is data that is synthesized across a few years because, of course, as I'm sure you all know, one of the specific challenges of doing this kind of work at this inflectional point in history is that COVID data is just challenging to interpret. And so we looked across several years to see if we could find patterning, right? And so we're reporting out. We don't want to report an anomalous data point from 2021 if it doesn't look like other years, so we worked to synthesize across several years. And what we found was Latino students tend to be performing around 20 percentage points below the average on assessments of ELA and math, and EML students tend to be performing around 30 percentage points below average. And so you can see a clear difference in the achievement of these groups of students.
What does this mean? Help me understand. So
Yes, of course.
our Latino students tend to perform 20 percentage point, but the overall EML students perform 30 points below.
That's correct, yes.
So the non-Latino, Latina students, EML students perform even worse.
I think, in fact, what it is, it's probably the non-EML Latino students that are performing better. Yeah. It's if you are a Latino student but you are not an EML student.
Right.
That it's the yeah.
Do we have data on just EML Latino students, how they perform?
We didn't look at that. The data is available. We didn't review that specific data. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I could have the next slide. So this is thinking, the one we're looking at now is thinking about the content areas, the English language arts and the mathematics. And then we also looked at English language development, English language proficiency achievement. And something that it's important to think about, there's a really critical distinction when you're looking at achievement data. When you look at ELA and mathematics, you're looking to see how students perform against the proficiency level. So a student might be proficient, they might be above proficient. However, for a student's English language development, it's the trajectory over time that's important, right? You don't expect a student to come in at a level 3. What you want to look at is to see, are students making growth? And so this data, you need to look at 2 years side by side for each individual student. And here you can see some COVID impact, or it sort of emerges from the data. So we see that between 2020 and 2022, the number of students who achieved proficiency sufficient to exit services declines by 2.3 percentage points, which doesn't seem like a big decline, but this is actually comparing a 2-year growth to a 1-year growth. So there is a decline there in the ELP achievement. And then the number of students that are achieving that year-on-year growth falls by 6. So, yeah, the number of students exiting falls by 2.3. The number of students achieving growth, even if they didn't exit, falls by 6%. And the places that we see that biggest decline, it's middle schoolers, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So that's where kiddos were really feeling that pandemic impact there. I could have the next slide, please. The graduation data are really sobering. So we see that about half of EML students don't graduate in 4 years, about a quarter of Latino students. And if you look at the gap in graduation rates, for Hispanic or Latino students, that gap is 12 percentage points behind the overall MCPS average and 17 percentage points behind white students. For EML students, it's 35 points behind the average and 41 points behind the overall rate for white students. And if I could have the next slide. We also looked to see if what these gaps looked like compared to national averages, and the gap is larger in MCPS than the national average of that gap, both for EML and for Latino students. We do see that fifth-year opportunity is very helpful. So we see that the percentage, if you have that extra fifth year to graduate, you see a rise of 4% for Hispanic or Latino students and a rise of 8% for EML students. And again, this is a synthesis across a couple of years just because there were some changes in the graduation requirements. There were some waivers and so forth based on the impact of COVID. And then I just want to share one more, next slide, please. One more piece of context that I think is really helpful and in thinking about, which is about attendance. So we found that there are attendance barriers for EML and Latino students. We looked at students with more than 20 days of excused absences. The countywide rate is that 13% of the total population has more than 20 days of unexcused absences. That is 23% for Latino students and 23% for EML students. So you'll remember I said 25% of Latino students don't graduate on time. So those we didn't do a detailed analysis of attendance versus graduation for individual students, but these numbers they pop as being real close to each other. So if I could have the next slide. So that is that is kind of our background and context here. And so what I want to talk to now is about sort of thinking about particularly that those attendance barriers and student engagement as being a piece of what keeps kids going to school. And so we looked to ask, I want to share these kind of mixed perspectives. You're a large school system. There's not one voice, one answer, one, particular sort of perspective that people have. They're diverse. And so, this student said, I love being here. My family and I love this country, this district, all the opportunities we are given, the teachers care and always help. This is a really positive, a student in a focus group. I think you talked to the student who just expressed, I appreciate being here. And I want to contrast that against something that an educator said to us. EMLs are not seen as assets, and until the deficit point of view is eliminated, we won't see the school system progress. So just, mixed perspectives here on what students and what educators are observing students and their families experiencing. May I have the next slide, please? So we were thinking about what does the research tell us about nurturing relationships and student engagement. And we know that from the research, a couple of indicators of student engagement that correlate very strongly with a dropout risk are absenteeism is one of them, and then behavioral challenges is another. And we looked at suspension data, and I want to put in a strong caveat here that, when you look at measures on disciplinary data on disciplinary measures, there's a strong subjective element in who disciplinary measures are applied to and who they are not. And so I want to make sure that if we think about this, we think about it from both the perspective of student behavior, but also that we know that there are potential biases in how discipline is meted out, right? So to be careful in our lenses with these data. But what we do see is that we see that Latino and EML students are suspended at more than twice the rate of white students. In a middle school, the rates are more than 3 times the rate of white students. And for EML students with disabilities, the suspension rate is more than 3 times the rate of white students. So in terms of a nurturing experience for these students, that's not what's happening if you're facing discipline and suspension. If I could have the next slide, please. The research tells us that for Latino students in particular, folks that have gone in to look at this group of students, strong and affirming relationships in a school community support engagement, achievement, and graduation success. And in particular, those strong relationships that are built on respect. I want to use this wonderful quote from a colleague, a Cal colleague who is now retired, but the benefits of multilingualism and a positive orientation toward the language and culture that students bring to school is an important part of that respect, that perspective of respect. And so we have recommendations that include sort of continuation of some of the current socio-emotional interventions that you are working on, but also increases in resources that are available, particularly to support the mental and socio-emotional health of multicultural and multilingual students, making sure that there are counselors who can work with students in their language if those students don't have English to work with a counselor, making sure that there's cultural competency among that group of professionals. If I could have the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more in here that I think also, so thinking about that specific, that recognition of the multilingualism and the cultural backgrounds, so two-way immersion programs are inherently respectful of that cultural difference. We also know that they benefit both EML students and their English fluent peers. They lead to achievement that is similar to or higher than students in English-only programs. There's good research out there on that. Again, those programs inherently recognize as cultural assets. We found that there's probably there's a pretty small proportion of students that are currently served by two-way programs, but we also caution against, if you want to expand these programs, you sort of have to do so carefully because they do need to be rolled out in a way that allows for the programs to be implemented well. So we think this is an area of promise. And if I could have the next slide, please. So our next, Oh, this one is one that I'm sorry, it's got lost in my slide deck. I'm going to put this one in here. Vicki and I chatted about this. She said, this seems a little out of its space. And I said, this slide is in here because I can't just talk about the achievement challenges of students. I have to bring to the picture some success of this group of kids. And this is a space of success. This is a graph of the AP language exams and the mean AP scores, and you can see on the left the scores for all students, and on the right are those EML students. Here's where they shine. These students are scoring in those AP exams, those language exams, at a higher level than all students. And so that, for me, is a real space where you can see the assets of those kids come out in the data here. All right, if I could have the next slide. So finally, I want to share some findings from the research that students see more optimal educational outcomes, test scores, academic attitude, fewer disciplinary incidents, fewer students dropping out of school when there's a racial or ethnic match between students and their educators. And so while there are about a third of those students in MCPS that are Latino or Latina, this is 2018 data, so I don't know if the data has been updated, but only 7% of the educators in the system at that time were Latinas, or we have recommendations in around continuing efforts to increase the diversity of the teaching force. And I had mentioned before that we had this strong representation from paraeducators in our survey. They were coming to the table to support these kids. And so thinking about how you all might set up some paraeducator to teacher recruitment pathways to find those folks in your community with cultural competence and language skills who might want to go to the next step and become classroom teachers might be somewhere to really think about. Teacher shortages are really a problem across the country right now, but here is a space where you all might be able to get some leverage there. If I could have the next slide, please. So that was our first kind of central synthesis about nurturing and welcoming environments. We also want to ensure that policies are in place that make sure that responsibility for EML students is shared across all educators. So we so frequently see this in school districts across the country that it's the ELD teachers that say, well, these kids, I'm responsible for taking care of these kids. They feel a great deal of responsibility. We don't always see that responsibility among content educators, general educators, or other parts of the school system. And so just making sure that responsibility is seen as central to everybody's work is very important. The U.S. Department of Education emphasizes for us that services to these students are not just their language proficiency, but also parity of participation in the standard instructional program. So content area education is really key. If I could have the next slide. So some evidence that we have here. We see, just in who responded to our educator survey and our focus groups, about a third of the respondents were ELD educators, which is much more than their share in the group of staff in MCPS. And we heard loud and clear that the work of supporting these students falls disproportionately on these educators. Research from folks that are expert in the field of content education for EML students really strongly brings the point that all educators need knowledge of their content, knowledge of how to teach their content, and knowledge of how to teach the language of their content, because every educator in the United States has students from diverse language backgrounds in their classroom. Our classroom observations indicate that the area of highest need that we see here is for high school content educators to get professional development on language and the content area, and also competence around culturally responsive practices. You have a fantastic group of educators in MCPS, and they're asking for this. They're saying, we would like to bring this into our professional practice. We would like to get this training. They are proactive in saying, here's what we need as professionals to support this group of students. If I could have the next slide. The other place that we saw real need is insufficient resources. So sufficient resources to support language acquisition, content learning, and some socio-emotional needs. We heard this loud and clear across surveys, across focus groups. Educators are expressing really severe concerns with their workload that they have to support EML students. We also did some analysis of the different position allocations in the system. One thing that we do notice is that in the high schools, there is a dedicated ESOL resource teacher role who supports activities and the administrative work across ELD teachers. So with EML students, there's work around connecting with parents. There's work around managing students' assessment levels and understanding where they are in the progression. And that falls with that ESOL resource teacher in the high school, but there isn't a parallel position at middle or elementary schools there. So that administrative work is distributed across the educators. If I could have the next slide. We also looked at some staffing ratios. These staffing ratios are quite complex. They vary by setting. So they vary. There are formulas based on that differ by elementary, middle, and high school that differ based on students' ELP level. We outline what those formulas look like in our full report, but there is essentially the takeaway here is that there's a really broad range of ratios. So they sort of vary from a ratio of about 1 to 20 to 1 to 88. The district-wide ratio is 1 to 38. And we pulled national numbers. So this is your ratio of an ELD teacher to EML students, right? We pulled national numbers, and the national ratio is 1 to 12. And so you're just 1 to 38 is just quite far away from that. So we do recommend increasing that ratio in the staffing formulas.
So I apologize, I'm going to interrupt you for one
Yes,
quick question. I was going to wait till the end, but because you're talking about the national averages here, part of our resolution was to include benchmarking between, other districts and the national average. And one of my colleagues has asked what are, in reference to this type of information, even with the graduations rates, MCPS were below the national average. Where do these students fall, and how do their outcomes compare to surrounding jurisdictions such as Prince George's and Fairfax?
So part of the tricky part of that is districts don't tend to give their data out. How do you compare it to surrounding districts? Graduation data, we could look at that. We didn't look at that specifically, and we could provide those for graduation. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips now. Okay.
I'll add just a brief comment. So if we look at it right now for 2021, for Maryland, the graduation rate is about 60.6 for the larger as the state for EMLs. For Montgomery County, we're at 67.4. Howard is about 66.2. Baltimore County, 59.2. Baltimore City, about 45.3. Frederick, about 63.3. So where we fall, we actually are one of the highest performing with grad rates. And again, this is looking at EMLs as well as recently reclassified.
Right,
EMLs.
okay, I appreciate that perspective, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah.
If I could have the next slide, please. And again, this is something that I mentioned on the previous point about welcoming and nurturing communities, but we also recommend investing in those additional multilingual and culturally competent counselors supporting students, particularly, in 2023 after we don't know what the impact of the pandemic on students is yet. We won't know that for 20 years. We won't know that. It's going to be an impact that's going to stay with our kids for their lives. If I could have the next slide. We also engaged with families and did some investigation around translation and interpretation services, and we find that these are not sufficient for the needs of families. We see some particular challenges around the numbers of translators and interpreters that are both trained and available. to support and communicate with families in a particular area of need is the special language that's needed, the technical language around special education, identification, evaluation, and implementation. This is something where a translator or an interpreter needs to understand the particularities of the technical understandings of that area. And, so additional investment needed there to make sure that there are sufficient numbers of trained translators and interpreters. And if I could have the next slide. And I'm going to wrap up by talking about some accountability and feedback recommendations. But they, of course, you need, if you're doing accountability and monitoring, you need staff in place to do that. So just to be thoughtful in terms of the implementation of those recommendations will also require staffing in central office to implement and enact. Okay, if I could have the next slide, and this is our fourth area, which is about sort of accountability and feedback loops that are needed. So just first of all, to sort of think about instructional practices are diverse across MCPS, and that's not in of itself a challenge or a problem or anything, right? So you need to have flexibility in instructional practices and EL services because you have different populations of students. And so local educational agencies have the flexibility. This is a short quote from U.S. Department of Education that says, you have flexibility, they have to meet civil rights requirements, they have to meet the needs of the EL population. And there are some specific civil rights tests in place that the U.S. Department of Education uses there. If I could have the next slide, please. So for elementary schools, there are a number of English language development programs that elementary schools can select from, and we didn't find any concerns with. These are sound program models. Schools have the ability to work with a program model or combination that makes sense in their local contexts. We did analysis of classroom instruction, and on average, we weren't seeing huge concerns there. What we do see is variability, right? So when you look at our averages, we're not worried about the average, but we do see schools that are stronger and schools that need more support. And so what we would like to see here, I think, is more of an accountability feedback between the model that the school selects and the monitoring from central office there, right? Which, again, needs the staff to execute that. So do you as a system have that careful understanding that the programs that you say schools are using are actually being implemented in those schools? If I could have the next slide. At the secondary level, the way that English language programs are enacted is through scheduling guidance. So there's some scheduling guidance that says if a student is at this level, here are the courses that they should be scheduled in. We heard strong concerns from our study participants that they're not sure that these scheduling requirements are always being met, that they're really onerous to implement, and sometimes the EML students they're at the end of the scheduling queue, and so there's just some questions around our students being scheduled according to those recommendations. And so here's where we want to draw the connection between scheduling and graduation, right? Because if a student isn't provided with the course track that they need for graduation because of scheduling considerations, that's going to be a barrier to graduation there. And so here is where we also recommend some more systematization of accountability practices, particularly attention to scheduling and supporting high school EML students, one-on-one individuals, to make sure that they're on track for graduation. And we have some specific requirements around that in the report. If I could have the next slide, please. We also want to draw attention to additional accountability and monitoring that we believe is needed around EML students with disabilities. So we could not find clear guidelines for consistent evaluation processes to be used across schools. We heard widespread variability among schools in evaluation, placement, and services for this group of students. We heard educators reporting that they wanted more training, that they hadn't received training on how to support this population. Something of particular concern is that we heard from some folks that they believed that a student could not access both English language services and special education services, which is not true. Students can be in both of those categories, and so here we recommend some development of clear guidelines for evaluation and placement, some periodic monitoring visits to make sure that these are being executed with fidelity.
Can you speak a little bit to the evaluation process?
I'm going to turn to my colleague who is an expert in this area.
So in terms of the evaluation process, this is where the previous slide on interpreters is really important because you have to evaluate kids in whatever language they're learning and whatever language they may have, and so. It's really important to follow certain procedures when evaluating EMLs that can be slightly different than when you're evaluating students whose first language is English. And those procedures for evaluation are sort of, there's, as Kira said, there's a lot of variability in how they're being implemented in different schools. Was there something specific about evaluation?
The purpose of my past colleague who moved the resolution originally forward, was to, kind of assess how the system is doing with what we currently have. I mean, we know we need more, as one of my colleagues mentioned, but so I guess what I'm trying to find out is when you say about the evaluation process, are you specifically talking about the teaching evaluation? Are you talking about the program's evaluations? Are you speaking to how students are scheduled?
No, this is specific to how you evaluate a student. If there's a disability that's suspected by parent or teacher, you make a referral. And then, yes, and then students, yes, this is specific to EMLs with disabilities.
Got it. Okay. I thought you meant
in general.
In general.
Yeah, no, this is very specific to EMLs with disabilities.
Okay, well, then we can come back to my question about evaluations later.
I have a clarifying question.
Okay.
Did I hear you say that when we do the scheduling with counselors, EML students are scheduled the last?
We heard a little bit of evidence about that. So part of the challenge there is that schools may not, the scheduling guidelines are contingent on a student's ELP level, right? Like, so a level 1 student has different scheduling guidelines than a level 2 student. And so there's schools have to wait until they get that student's assessment from the prior year to know what level that student is at, to know which scheduling track to put them in. So there's sort of a structural challenge there.
Why wouldn't they have it at the same time as other students?
Because only the EML students have the ELP level.
So because the WIDA test is done in January.
Because the WIDA.
The results won't be back until April and May, and we start scheduling in February or late January.
That's
okay,
exactly
I got
correct,
it now.
yes.
Okay, I got a timeline correct now. Thank you so much for that clarification.
Is that? Oh, yeah. Okay, you can continue, sorry.
Okay. I have one last slide. I am actually almost finished. So yeah, just if I could have the next slide, please. Just again, to restate our synthesis here, EML and Latino students in MCPS, we talked a little about their backgrounds and context, but then we synthesize all of our findings and recommendations under these 4 headings that the nurturing relationships and welcoming environments are critical for student engagement and academic success, that responsibility should be shared across all MCPS educators, that sufficient resources must be allocated to support those 3 pillars of language acquisition, content learning, and socio-emotional needs, and then that those transparent accountability feedback loops are needed to ensure that those resources are allocated and those policies are implemented. And I think I have 2 final slides, if I could have the next one, please. As I said at the beginning, this is kind of an overview and a taste, a synthesis of our recommendations, but our full set of detailed recommendations is in the executive summary of our research report, and then that background evidence that comes from our investigation and our data collection are provided within the chapters of that report.
Okay, I do have one quick clarifying question. The evaluation process, it's done with interpreters, you said?
There's the process for, I think you're talking about the process for evaluating if a child has a disability.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
It's done with an interpreter as,
It can be done with an interpreter. The best practice would call for bilingual personnel to be doing the evaluation, but you don't have enough of those, and frankly, nobody else does. And right now,
because I don't think that's best practices, but.
Well, no,
So
but-
what you're saying is, though.
yes, but you can do a very good evaluation with interpreters as long as the interpreters are trained.
Right.
In understanding concepts in special education, confidentiality, and then the other part of that is training the evaluation personnel to know how to work with interpreters. Because it's not just the interpreters working with, a psychologist. Psychologist has to know how to use that interpreter effectively in that evaluation process.
So I guess that's sort of where I was headed, is there somebody else in the process with them other than the interpreter to actually?
Well, there's a clinician in there.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, well, it's a psychologist, I'm just.
Yeah, so for example, a psychologist would either be bilingual, so if it's a Spanish-speaking student, the psychologist can do both languages.
Okay.
And you have to, it's sort of an art, not an art, but you need to understand the background of the child in order to evaluate successfully for the existence, for the possibility of a disability.
And do you know, go ahead.
And if I just might add, we have a team here, the bilingual assessment team. They're not a part of our, we're curriculum and instruction, but there is a bilingual assessment team. I think what the finding calls for is that there aren't enough bilingual and assessment team members, and maybe the languages are not enough in terms of the representation of what needs to happen. And when I also think about the intake process, in our international admissions and enrollment office, there are screenings sometimes that happens in other languages. For example, for our SLIFE, our students with limited and interrupted formal education, they try as best as they can to evaluate in the student's first language so as to determine if the student is coming with content knowledge as well as their language needs. And we just need to work on upgrading the tools that we use for those evaluations as well. So.
And I think part of the point on this is also that the interpreters, it can't just be an interpreter. You can be a trained interpreter, go in, work with parents, whatever, but when you're doing interpretation during a special education evaluation, you need to have some background on the testing materials, on the specific vocabulary that's being used during testing, and need to be able to understand how to interpret for the clinician what the students are saying. I'm a trained special ed interpreter, so I had to take something like a ton of college courses.
Right.
So we need to be able to say, okay, you're going to interpret for special education, let's give them some training on the evaluation process, on the instruments being used, and make available the vocabulary or a glossary of terms that they're going to need when they're speaking to the students and when they're interpreting for the clinician.
So a follow-up question for MCPS would be, we'd be interested to know how many of those type of interpreters we have and how much training each of them receive?
We actually spoke to the folks at the interpretation office. You have a really great staff here. I mean, they know what to do. It's just not necessarily spread across MCPS. But the interpretation office, I believe they have about 100 plus, 100 maybe 40 interpreters and about 40-some translators. So that's a really low number. They don't get paid very well. You can see that in the section.
I've heard that from.
Yeah, they don't get paid really well. They don't really want to travel far. I mean, this is a huge county, so they don't want to necessarily be here and have to travel over to the school over here because they're not paid for travel time either.
Oh.
So I think that a greater investment in increasing, they know exactly what they're doing in that office. They've even trained school personnel and to serve as interpreters, and they're offered an additional stipend in addition to their salary. So there is all the knowledge you need in terms of what to do is here in your staff. You know, you have really great staff. I think it just needs to, obviously there's going to be more resources needed as well as more consistency across the board.
And I just want to say that we do have a distinction between our bilingual assessment team that's housed at Rocking Horse. That's probably less than 10 to 12, around that number, and the interpreters in the communications office. So there are two separate groups of people who have two separate functions. But our bilingual assessment team is pretty small to do the work when we think about the number of students that we have coming in that need to be evaluated. We will get the exact number for you.
Thank you. Specifically about the training.
The training.
Most importantly, how many of them are trained, or all of them, I would hope. But
Are you talking specifically about the interpreters?
I am, and the bilingual assessment, making sure that they're trained in the assessment, right, oh, okay.
They actually,
I think it's just,
They have all the training.
yeah, we spoke to members.
Then just the interpreters is a concern.
Yeah, well,
that's
the
been raised.
interpreters are trained, so the folks that are on your payroll right now are trained.
right.
But they're just too few of them. Yes, all of them are trained.
But
but they're
Mrs.
not enough.
Hazel has a good point that the assessment is a bilingual assessment team, is a separate unit. And when you do assessment through an interpreter, it's not as effective as doing assessment with a bilingual team. So
But
there's a distinction there.
But what really is malpractice is if you do it in English. So that's, in English only. And, I've seen people do, or district schools do that, and it's like, well, I don't know what you're getting from that. So, in absence of bilingual clinicians, which is, of course, ideal, but difficult to recruit, some of your languages are going to be almost impossible to recruit. Like a physician and, psychologist in some of the languages in the district. So that's sort of the next step is the interpreters, is using interpreters.
And just one thing to add, when we talk about how many of our EMLs are identified for special needs, this is just this year, looking at December date, about 18%. So it is higher than the national average, so we should be aware of that.
Okay.
Do you have other questions for our Cal team?
I guess I do in terms of, and I'll check with my colleagues as well, but in terms of some of the recommendation aspects. So I didn't know if that's more of you all or if you want them to participate in that as well.
Yes, well, we were going to just kind of highlight some of the big rocks that we identified that in terms of next steps. But if you have some specific questions for the team.
Well, why, so will they be leaving?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, well, first let me check with my colleagues. Do you have any questions specifically for the team?
Not for the Cal.
Okay.
I will wait for the next step.
Okay.
After that, to ask my questions.
Ms. Harris?
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of questions, and in this, may go to you all, and it may go to everybody. But first and foremost, So it's clear we're not doing as well as we need to. And it also seems like, I mean, I don't take a lot of comfort in hearing that Montgomery County is doing better than the surrounding jurisdictions with our graduation rates for this population, because it's clear, based on what you said, by implication, Maryland is not doing very well in serving this population of students. So we need to be looking elsewhere at systems that are doing this work well. And so the benchmarking piece, did you look into systems who perform very, very well for this population of students so that we can be looking at their practices? Because I do know some systems that are very high performing, and I just wondered if you had done that benchmarking bit yet.
You're going to say something? I don't know. Yeah. Who's doing really well?
You know, that's a really difficult question
Yeah.
because I can tell you, neighboring counties or whatever that are, it's just really hard to answer that question because a school district rarely does perfectly on everything. And this is typically a population that districts struggle to serve, which is not to say that there isn't research or resources that are out there to be able to improve that. But it's something that a lot of districts struggle with. And there are some districts really doing well, and, we could probably point you to that.
I think that's what we need to see. I mean,
Great.
Where are these students graduating at high levels? And I think I would point you to Oakland Unified, LA Unified, as systems who have been identified as national best practices.
Well, there's also Alexandria City Public Schools has a program for English learners in their high school. That is a model that was started in New York and has been exported, the international schools, and it's been exported to other school districts. And they're doing a phenomenal job. They've avoided a lot of the pitfalls of the scheduling and the content versus language teachers in high school.
Is that a separate school? I'd asked in the past about
the international schools. It's within the I don't remember what the high schools.
It's not a separate school.
Name, but it's in the high school. But it's. Do you know what?
I know the New York system is that the schools are within the New York City Department of Education. They're not separate. And some of them, the students will finish off the whole 4 years, and in most of those students, if they reach a certain level, go back to their home schools after. And they specialize mainly in the secondary level.
You mean the newcomer programs
Yeah,
or the internationals?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Both programs.
Yeah.
The internationals tend to stay all 4 years, and the newcomer schools, the students tend to go back to their home school.
Yeah.
And high school is really the point where you want that
Absolutely.
the
target.
content and the language really well integrated. I mean, you want it all along, but that's where it really makes a huge difference because it gets kids enough of those credits to graduate. Because with ELLs, you can happen to get to the end of the 4 years and they just don't have enough.
Well, that's has been one of the Special Populations Committee, as well as the full board's interest in, would our resources be better spent having an international / newcomers high school where everything is all right there, as opposed to trying to separate it out. And I don't know what the best practices for that is nationally.
I think it depends on the district. There are a few other international schools. There's one in DC Public Schools or two in DC Public Schools. They typically tend to have higher graduation rates, like 85% graduation rates. So that is a very promising model that I've been looking at for years, and they do a lot of project-based learning. And so, they're very effective models. I mean, an 85% graduation rate is pretty
I
good.
think in Oakland and Los Angeles, they have, strong international newcomer programs.
Yeah.
They're not isolated. There are some of them in dedicated high school, so it's sort of a little bit of a school within a school. But they're very high, very, very high.
There's also a really great program at LaGuardia. They have international schools in LaGuardia Community College, and so the kids are doing dual credits, which is really phenomenal because they're leaving high school with college credits already.
Yeah, and they have one in every borough
Yeah. Yep. We need to be looking at what
But the other thing is that it's a numbers game also, because it's very difficult if you have 28,000 plus students to compare them, for example, New York City that has 145,000, EMLs. So it's finding good quality programs that are, close to your demographics and your numbers so that you can see real effectiveness.
Yep.
Same thing with LA. LA, you're talking, 300,000 students.
But I mean, I would just look at, with our number of not just our total EML students, which is greater than our population of Latinx students, but just that population alone that's bigger than 85% of the school systems in the country. So it's kind of failing that population is just not okay.
Turn your light on. Someone else has to turn their lights off.
The demographic numbers, your proportion of EML students looks like California, about 18% of students.
Yep. So I have a question specifically looking at, two actually. So I do appreciate the way you looked at the discipline data. And I think one of the things that we need to do, and I hear this from students all the time, is one way you get students to stay is you create an experience in which they feel successful and in which they find value. And I think the way that we have taught our EML students for too long is one that is it's very, a lot of pressure on the students because we just expect them to learn the language and perform in a language that is foreign to them. And it tends to create a message, and I think you're right. We have a lot of really great folks in the system who work really hard and really want to do this work well. But, when you have that resource is a bit scattered and fragmented, I think we've tended to have a program of educating our EML students that basically tells them you're not good enough the way you are. And so we need to flip that around, and I really appreciated that you highlighted the need for, a teacher said this deficit point of view. We need to stop looking at these students as having deficits, but celebrating you pointed out just the multilingualism, which is, that's the world. If you want to succeed in the world right now, you got to speak more than one language, and these kids already do. But also, resilience and adversity swim in the same stream. So a lot of our students come from us through difficult pathways, and we got to stop looking at that as, oh, you poor thing, let us fix you, because they're bringing so much strength and value with them, and we don't celebrate that. And we need to celebrate them as who they are and what they are when they come to us, as well as helping to provide them the most robust education we can, and make it an experience that not only makes them feel successful, but it's fun. Learning should be fun, and so I'm really interested in your classroom observations. And you mentioned, there's variability, and I'm hoping that you pulled out schools, classrooms that are really highly performing, and maybe created, some in your data around are the ones where you were seeing higher performing, work in the classroom, more fidelity, more strength in instructional practices. Are those schools with a closer ratio of language ability between the staff and the students, or more students in the program?
That I wish we could have. That is an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. We weren't able to get to that level of granularity. There is research out there. So we pulled from, where we didn't do the observation at that level of granularity. We do bring in the external research, and so we cite some work in there that's about, the evidence of increased success for students when they do feel, and again, it's that feedback loop between I feel welcomed, I am engaged, I come to school, I participate. We didn't see huge challenges with your instructional practices, but the instructional practices are of no support to a student if they're not in the classroom that day, because they are facing whatever attendance barriers, and there's an engagement question for them.
We need
there.
to be mindful of time.
Oh, yeah,
Just
yeah.
as an FYI, there's still a whole nother section.
So just one question around we spent a lot of time talking about special education assessment, and this is just a conceptual question, but, because I really don't know the answer, students come to us from many, many, many different cultures, traditions, countries, educational experiences. Do we find it's a barrier, or, I don't even know if barrier is the right word, but do families come to us with sort of a common understanding of what special education is? Or is it even a thing where some of our families come from?
In some places, the concept of disabilities is quite different. It just really depends on where they're coming from. So that's why you need really good clinicians who can tease that out and who are able to educate parents. Essentially, part of the
In a
process.
positive kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. But part of what a good, like when I was doing evaluations in special education, part of my job was to explain to parents from other countries what that meant and how that's processed. Because I had a lady come up and hug me and thank me for all these free services that I'm giving her. And it's like, your child is entitled to those. I'm not doing any favor for you. So, that also has to be part of the equation, is making sure that parents, and that's actually required by law, that parents understand what it is that you're talking about.
And I often wonder if we need to do a better job of orienting our families to what the U.S. educational system is actually like as compared to what they might have experienced.
Yeah, there's actually good, I know that your PCCs do a lot of that. They work with individual, they do a great job working with individual parents.
I do have a clarifying questions for the.
Very direct, if you can.
Yes, very direct. You mentioned that you have engaged the two-way immersion schools in your data collection. Can you explain very directly what data did you collect and what was your finding?
From two-way immersion schools?
Yes.
From two-way immersion schools, we engaged in, first of all, we asked in the survey if folks would please identify if they worked with a two-way immersion school. And so we were able to break that data out and look at some questions specific to those schools around educator background and training. We had focus groups in those schools. We had classroom observations specifically in those schools as well. And I'll say, I'll also turn to Tamara to remind me, because I know this is central to her work. One of our key findings was there's some change in that sector right now, and was around making sure that there was sort of good stakeholder involvement as that change was rolled out, that folks understood the purposes of the changes and the research behind them.
And the finding is consistent with the rest of our EDL learners in other settings.
Oh, in terms of their academic performances?
Right.
We were not able to get that data.
From us, you couldn't get the
Yes.
data? So no proof of
Pudding?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
but now the national data.
Return on our investment, no proof of return.
The national data is pretty clear about, and we do include that information in the report. There is a wealth of research studies that demonstrate, the benefit of dual language.
And I am going to ask Tamara if she can speak to, we have been, as I shared, we're waiting for that next round of evidence of learning data, but she's been doing some research with her team to just gain a sense. So if you can share.
Okay.
Hi again. So if we look at our fourth grade data, well, let me just back up a little. So we know that the pandemic hit, and we were rolling this program out for the first time during this pandemic. So we have some schools that are up to fifth grade, and those fifth graders were in second grade when the pandemic hit. And so with such a unique program, and we know that switch from second to third grade is a really critical one in a child's life. Imagine learning in two languages. And so, with the absence of data within those that period of those years, those students are in 5th grade. So we took a look at our 4th graders, our current 4th graders who were in 1st grade. And so when we look at the students who are in the two-way immersion program, who've been in the program, we see, of course, an increase in performance when we look at their MAP Lexile scores from school year 21-22 to 22-23 of 4th graders across the programs. We see an increase of 4 percentage points. And so right now our 4th graders are, their Lexile in terms of meeting, they're at about a 71% in our two-way immersion schools, and those are the students who are not identified as EMLs. When we look at our EMLs, we see that their performance is lower, and it's stayed the same from last year to this year. They're at about 20%. And we know that we have a lot of Latino families in our two-way immersion schools by the nature of where the programs are. So we have lots of Latino students who are benefiting from this program who don't receive services, and we have our EMLs who are majority Latino, Latine, just get everybody. And they are also benefiting from the program. When we compare that to similarly demographic schools, to our two-way immersion schools, we see that our grade 4 students this year, when we compared it to, our five schools, their Lexiles are at a 71% as well for MAPR. So here we have students who are learning in 2 languages, who have been impacted, and their sociocultural competence, their sense of belonging, their ability to show up to school and leverage their first language. It's happening all in the school. So we don't see like a distinct difference, but the research shows, had we not had a pandemic, we would, at 4th, 5th grade, that's when we would start to see the return in investment. So I know, you want to see kindergartners doing it well, but the research says 4th, 5th grade, that's when you start to see they start to move ahead and pull ahead. So we can't necessarily say what the impact is of the pandemic, but we know based on our system data, there has been impact on all students. And when we think about our students in our two-way immersion programs, we know that to be learning in 2 languages, that is enrichment. By nature of the work in itself, they have such a linguistic load that they're carrying every day, and they're showing that they're making improvements. When we look at the MAP-M data, school year 21-22, our grade 4 students, for students who were not EMLs, are at 44%, and they increased to 56% this year. So, you see the impact of school, in school instruction, being able to have it in both languages. And for our EMLs, they're at 15% achievement this year. And so we know that our math data across the system has taken a hit. The math data across the nation has taken a hit. And we expect that as, this year is a little more normal than last year. As we continue, we will see an increase in those scores. And when we look at grade 4 non-TWI schools, for our students who are not receiving, who don't consider themselves EMLs, or not consider themselves, who aren't in the program, they're at 58%. So we have TWI at 56%. The non-TWI schools at 58%, but our EMLs are at 15% in TWI schools, when the EMLs and the non-TWI schools are at 14% for math. So again, we have language, we have literacy, everything working in tandem, and students really feeling a sense of belonging. They're seen for their assets. They get to become students who can navigate the real world that we are preparing them for, which is going to be multilingual, and they're still learning.
Okay. So I know we need to continue on.
Yes, we just have
Hazel,
like
if you
a
wanna-
couple more slides, and then please stay. Cal, yes, we have a couple more from our end, and then we'll wrap
Can
up.
we go to the next slide, please? One more. So the Del May team, along with others from OSIP, looked at this report, and we wanted to just highlight 4 areas for you at this point. You've heard a lot about them. So, the staffing, the growth, central office. Question for us is, how do we keep up with that growing enrollment? And we know that this is a component of the blueprint, and so, something that we're going to have to address. High school graduation. What really are the factors, what are the obstacles that are keeping our students from graduating? So it may be what came out in the report, right? The fact that they're scheduled last, and so there may be issues with the courses that they have access to, because at some point courses may fill up and all of a sudden you can't get into that class. So really diving into those obstacles that are keeping students from attending. So the absenteeism, what keeps students out of school? Is it a job? Is it, responsibilities that they have, again, particularly in high school, that keeps them out of school? Is it not feeling like they belong there, that they're welcomed and want to be there? We're going to look at the role of CREA, the program we have currently, for particularly our formerly MET students that have been identified as possibly not being on track to graduate. But how can we leverage the work that CREA is doing? Montgomery College, we're looking into to see how they can support with some of the students and, ensuring really ideally that they all do graduate. But we want to just look deeper to see what's happening with that. And finally, the parent refusals. And the parent refusals we find are happening particularly for students that have been identified as special education students. So it's this feeling that parents have that, well, I can't be here and there, I'm being pulled in so many different ways. And so working with the high schools to ensure they, that there are systems in place, structures to support all of the students so that really, ideally, they continue to receive their ELD services, because if they're not getting the services, that's a disadvantage for them in terms of how are we setting them up to be able to graduate, right? It's a roadblock. So we'll look at all of that. And then the last slide, or the next slide, can we go to the next slide, please? 2 other big rocks that came up for us were around professional learning. So what are some of those best practices? We have done a lot of work already around co-planning, co-teaching, but it has been mostly with our ELD staff. We need to grow that out to all teachers, because as was shared earlier, the students, our EMLs, belong to all of us.
Correct.
They don't just belong to the ELD program and ELD teachers, much like special education students, right? They are all our students. So looking at how we can grow that. And then the role of the secondary resource teacher. Again, I liken this to the RITC that's available at our middle and high schools to address the needs of the special ed students and the special educators to ensure students are getting the services we need. We have a limited number currently at our high schools. Not every high school has one resource teacher, but how could we grow this out, again, across all grade levels, elementary through high school? This also, I think the professional learning goes along with, again, what is in the Maryland Blueprint, as well as a lot of the anti-racism work that we're doing from the audit that was conducted. And then finally, for the two-way immersion, you heard about, what we currently have. So really, what are those best practices for growing the program, taking our time to identify what is working, ensuring that there's consistency. We currently have 6 schools with TWI programs. How do we bring consistency to the 6 schools? The data right now looks a little messy because of the last few years, but interestingly, just this morning at the Elementary Principals PLC, one of the principals spoke up about the TWI program and spoke about the value to a child, and it hit my heart. You know, speaking your own language is a part of what defines any of us. You know, the language that we grow up with is part of who we are. And so we have to find ways to value that. And I think we've heard that over and over. And two-way immersion is certainly a way for us to bring that value to all of our students and benefit English speakers, right? Because in this global world that we live in, that will certainly be an asset. So then the last slide, for real this time. Oh, there are 2 more? I lied again. All right, well, quickly, we just need to share out this report. This is the first that, you know, we're all having an opportunity to discuss it, so you can see some of our stakeholder groups that we will need to share out with. And then finally, last slide, how do we, you know, collect more feedback? The big rocks that we identified is a small group of us diving into this, but we want to get more feedback on this, on all the work that was conducted to ensure that we are really on the right track. And then, so that'll happen throughout the month of February, and in March, we will bring back further updates to the Board of Education at that March meeting that we're scheduled for.
Okay. Yep, so I'm going to let each of these say one more very quick thing, but I am going to thank you very much for the work that you did on this. I am going to put out there that I do feel a lot of disappointment over the lack of student voice that I hear in this, in terms of what's working for them, what they think they could use more of or less of or whatever. So I don't know how we would do that, but like I said, when I go into ESOL classrooms and speak to students and I ask them, they have thoughts. They have very good thoughts about what would help them be more successful. And so I'm throwing that out there.
Thank you. That's useful feedback for us. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Harris?
Yeah, the one huge piece missing for me here, again, I'm hearing kind of the MCPS, these are our big rocks, you know, train more people, get more of this there, but we need to look at what's working in other places, and we need a very direct look at systems that use an international program, a newcomer program specifically, whether it's a separate school, school within a school, separate program for a specific number of years or to a specific attainment level. That's what we need to see. That's what I need to see.
That's what I'd like to see, because that was originally what was asked for as part of, I don't know if it was actually specifically in the resolution, but at the Special Populations Committee meeting where we had this discussion about what we wanted to see, that was one of the things that I very specifically asked about, because, you know, Quince Orchard past principal had done a pilot program for students who were not doing well in math, and she taught the class in math, in Spanish, and just to see, is it that they're not understanding the content or they're just not understanding what we're saying? And she said the results were incredible, and to have a program, a school, you know, where, to your point, being able to speak your language and have everybody understand what you're saying, you know, could be huge. So anyways, thank you. If we could get some of that feedback, though, data, that would be helpful.
So when we will, in the time that between now and when we come back,
Okay.
as we work with our stakeholders, we will ensure that we meet with students.
Great.
And we will also do some work around looking at what other districts are doing. We will come back with some short-term, I'm going to say quick wins. They may not be quick, but absenteeism and some things that we can immediately address. And then we will also be looking at some longer-term changes that we need to make to our programming that we will share with you when we come back in March with the whole board.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm just going to ask one quick thing. We finalized our budget process
Yes.
in February. Could we at least get some of the comparison data from other districts that are doing it well, to Mrs. Harris?
Sure.
She listed a bunch of them. Yes?
Is there anything in specific that you want the comparison to be?
We would like to see what some districts that have very high success rates and what they're doing.
Like how they're staffed, I guess.
How they're staffed, or is it a special programs? Is it a school? Is it an international school,
what might-
magnet program in it maybe? Or
What might the budget implications be?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
thank you. Okay. Well, then, Ms.
Thank you.
I was going to say.
Okay,
Hazel,
and we
unless-
appreciate you very much. for
I'm
your-
sorry.
Oh, you have one
Sorry,
more
go
comment?
ahead.
Yes.
So I'm new to the board, I'm new to the committee. I appreciate how the report have summarized what I know in the field, the little pieces of anecdotes, but you are able to streamline it, put it down into big pieces and very clear. I think it's very valuable for us as a system to have this report. So thank you for doing this work. And I really look forward to see the next steps when we come back in March. One of the recommendations talk about a para to teacher. That I think it's a very valuable and very ready to be used because we have those paras. So I am interested in March to see if we can make some headway that way. So really appreciate. I think our staff work extremely hard with our students in the building. I appreciate everyone's work. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity also to work with the district. We very much enjoyed digging in and learning more about your students and your teachers, and so appreciate the opportunity to work with you all.
Thank you very much. Sorry to have rushed everybody at the end. Thank you. I usually schedule these meetings for longer. They're usually.
And we have two big topics.
I know.
Good stuff happens.
Oh.
This was supposed to be.
Oh, okay. So, because that.
Finish right on time.
Right, exactly. But
Good job.
that's why I usually. But I mean, it still could have. We certainly could have talked more. Okay. Okay. So we're going to move on to the next. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on to what is this considered section 4? Item number 4. That's fine. So why don't we do this? We're going to just hold, I'm going to ask my colleagues to hold all questions. If they have a question, it needs to be a question without a statement. And we'll just let you go ahead and give us the presentation, and we'll try to be respectful of your time as well.
Okay, thank you. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And I will have the team just introduce themselves to you very quickly before I get started.
Good morning, afternoon. I'm Christy Clark. I am the supervisor for accelerated and enriched instruction.
Good afternoon, Jeannie Franklin, Director of Consortia Choice and Application Program Services.
And very quickly, we just want to provide you with an update around gifted programming. We were here last time in this fall, and we talked about gifted programming with our Title I schools. And so that was a really positive experience and got really great feedback. And just wanted to highlight before we get into this, the work that our office and AEI and Consortia Choice have been doing to really expand access and opportunity for our students. So over the last 5 years have really been working to make sure that, particularly for our underrepresented students, we have been providing more opportunities for access to our programs. And we want to really just kind of highlight for you just that we have expanded in our regional centers and our local centers for enriched studies, our enriched literacy curriculum, benchmark it with advancement for our grade 4 and 5 students. We have enrichment in math and humanities in our middle schools, and also our central review for local norming with our elementary and middle schools. So we have been doing a lot of work over the last 5 years to really provide that enrichment, and have been working with our communities along the way. We have an AEI feedback council, and we also meet with our MCC-PTA GT advisory group. And so a lot of questions over the last couple of years have come in around the practices, around data, lots of recommendations coming from our community partners in the form of lots of written requests. And I do want to just state that we have been responding. I know sometimes it may feel like, or it reads as if we have not been, but we have been responding to a lot of questions. Sometimes responses bring more questions, and so it's just been a process that we continue to work through. So we did receive a complaint from the public, and we had responded to many of the questions, and we received from the board a request to provide more detail around the 3 areas that are listed on the screen as it relates to staff training and how it complies with MCPS policy regulations, development of GT program curriculum, and the formal review of GT programs. And so just very quickly, we have been following the MCPS policy, IOA, and really working to make sure that we are in compliance with those policies and regulations. As it relates to staff training, we definitely make sure that we are following IOA and making sure that we mandate that our staff who are designated to work with our GT students and other highly able students are receiving training. And you have in a memo that we shared with you a list of all the different types of training that we provide our staff, but we do provide staff training in our highly gifted centers, all of our GT enrichment programming. We provide training for them, our enriched literacy program. We provide 3 full days of training for our middle schools who have accelerated and enriched programs. And so we have a long list, and we also work with our content supervisors to ensure that they are embedding enrichment and acceleration into their training for our general education teachers as well. So that is something that continues. ELD, our ELC curriculum that we will be expanding to all schools. When we started, had 2 full days of training, and we'll be moving to 5 days of training. So we really do want to make sure that our teachers are well prepared to meet the needs of our students. And it's classroom teachers, GT liaisons, reading specialists, staff development teachers, our primary talent coaches that are in our primary schools. All of them are receiving training. I don't know if any of you have anything else you want to add to that. Okay. Questions about training, or do you want me to continue?
Why don't you continue, and
Okay.
then, because I have one question about, but it's more about something else, so
Okay.
go ahead.
And in terms of the curriculum and access to curriculum, again, that is, I want to make very clear, we have been providing resources, documents, scope and sequence to our curriculum that we have on our website. We actually hired an individual to come and take as much of the content that they could, because of our new platforms, data platforms, a lot of it's kind of hidden for our parents, and so taking all of those, making them into PDFs and placing them on our site. So that has happened. We're still continuing to do some of that work, particularly around our middle school magnet programs. Many of those programs, as you know, as they were developed at the local school. And so unlike a regular math curriculum or a literacy curriculum where we have a little bit more central control. Those programs were developed more organically at the school using the same standards, but the programs look a little bit different. And so we have, Christy has been working with a team going out into schools to ensure there's more consistency and that we have common scope and sequences for all of those school programs that have the same themes. So we want to make sure that that equity exists. Scope and sequences for the themed middle school magnet programs will be completed by June of '24. We are ensuring, as we are looking at our middle school English courses, we want to make sure that we have enrichment taking place with our English and also enrichment taking place with our science courses in middle school. There is a request to create new courses where students are have their own cohort. But right now, our stance is that we want to provide high-quality programming with enrichment. And so our teams, our science team is working with us to create grade 6 Earth Science enrichment in that course, and also grade 7 in their science curriculum. So we'll be doing that spring of '23, and then grade 8 in '24. So these are things that we're continuing to add. And then as we build out our new high schools, we will also ensure that those programs, Woodward and Crown, also have enrichment opportunities for students as well.
So when you say the review of the programs, do you just mean the magnet programs, or do you mean all of our enrichment?
So that, I was just speaking to the curriculum piece. I'm going to talk about the GT programs next. Do you want to add anything around the curriculum pieces? I know we're going fast.
We are, but I think you covered it.
Okay.
I have one curriculum question. I don't know if my colleagues, but the teachers obviously need to follow a curriculum regardless of what type of program or whatever it is. How is that not just online? In other words, I understand you're putting, but people say to me, where can I find the curriculum? It would seem to me like it would just be kind of like a listed, here's what what you have to master.
So
And here's how
most
we
of
go
it is
about it.
online. It's the magnet programs that a lot of the content, the lessons are developed by the teachers. So we give them the standards. Those are the things that we provide to all schools. But a lot of the lessons are developed by teachers.
Oh.
We don't post what teachers develop onto our website.
Got it.
And so if it's something that our hired staff produce, then we will post, or if it's something that we purchase. But in terms of what a teacher develops, that is not posted in, but we want to ensure that those common scope and sequences are available for our parents and others to view.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a quick
Yes.
curriculum?
Yeah, clarifying questions. One for the training, one for the curriculum. For the training, really appreciate all the training you talk about for the ELC and AIM, for all our schools for enrichment. Can you speak specifically what would the center teachers, like in the elementary enrichment centers or middle school magnet programs, what do those teachers get in terms of training?
Yes, so in the centers, because the centers have been around for quite some time, we provide specific training for the new teachers of the centers. And we make sure that they are trained in the summer as well as during the school year. Next school year, we are going to also include all teachers. So we're going to have a refresher training just to make sure that teachers understand any newly added pieces to the curriculum. We make sure that they understand and know how to use it and implement it in their program. We also, throughout the school year, train the reading specialists as well as the GT liaisons to, it's sort of the trainer model during the school year. And we provide them with information to make sure that they are supporting their teachers in-house.
What about the middle school? Can you speak about the middle school?
Yes, so in the middle schools, we have what's called AISTs, accelerated and enriched instructional support teachers, long name. And we train them as well throughout the school year so that they can support the teachers that teach the enriched courses. We also provide training to any new teachers of the AIM courses and the high courses.
That AIM is, okay, but those are not specifically for MENEC school programs still. Those AIM is for the whole system-wide, right?
Right.
Can you speak about the specific training for magnet?
For the
school?
magnets. So any new teachers that are teaching any of the
new
magnet
teachers.
courses,
You provide
they
them.
also, yes.
Okay, now my question, clarifying question is for the curriculum. So good to hear that the science 6, 7, and 8 are in development. Are there any plans to the development of English 6, 7, and 8 curriculum? Because I know that in our middle schools, we have on grade level English and honors English. Are we looking at gifted and talented curriculum for English in 6, 7, and 8?
Well, one clarification for sixth grade science, that is already being implemented this school year. So it's new this school year.
Okay.
That's just one clarification. And I believe Nikki just addressed the individual courses for English. So right now, we are working with, my team is working with the secondary English supervisor and her team in developing novel studies with higher level advanced novels for students that would benefit to have their own kind of reading groups within the classroom. And so right now we are promoting differentiation. Study Sync also has a module called Beyond the Book. And there are ways that teachers can actually assign specific assignments to individual students. And so we are planning to work with the reading team to make sure that professional development, more professional development is provided, because we're not totally confident that the teachers are utilizing all of the features of Study Sync. And as an example, maybe a student in a particular class may be assigned the same book, but there is a way to assign different books and different projects and assignments to different groups of students, as well as individual students.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
A couple of clarifying questions first. And I'm referencing the January 25th memo. One thing in there, it says middle school students have access to numerous high school courses, languages, math, elective science. Can we get a list of which high school classes are offered in which middle schools? Because I know it's not uniform. And then can we get some, I've heard from students and families confusion about, they take that high school course in middle school. Do they have to take that grade on their transcript if they don't perform as well as they hoped, and they can retake that class? Can we get some clarification about that for families?
It's the higher grade, correct?
Yeah.
I was going to say, isn't it just, it's the higher grade? Yeah.
Uniformly. I just make sure, we want to make sure we communicate that. So question about, I'm very excited to see in here the reference to the grade 6 science. It's the consistent through line related to climate change with the goal of creating environmental change agents. Hurrah. Please tell me this is not just limited to enriched science. Are all of our students getting this through line of climate change with the design of making them environmental change agents?
Yes, they are. It's all of grade 6.
And that launched at the beginning of this academic year?
Yes.
Awesome. I cannot wait to see more about that. And then the last question I had, looking at maybe two more. So you've got post-METS. We did universal screening of 5th graders, identified rising 6th graders at every school, every zip code for enrichment, created the 2 classes, historical inquiry into global humanities, 6, 7, 8, applied investigations in math, 6, 7, and 8. So did this replace, for the math piece, the emphasis on getting kids into algebra, at least by the 8th grade? Or is this, or would this be something that they would be in this track, or they could opt out into algebra at some point?
So our goal is to make sure that our students are successful in algebra in 7th, 8th, or 9th. And we want to make sure that students have on and off ramps. So that's why we have these different courses. Student might be in 4-5 or 5-6, and we may decide that they need to, maybe not move so quickly. And so the purpose of these courses was really to allow students to be able to move in different directions, either if they needed to accelerate more or to slow down a little bit, because we do want to see the success with algebra. I think right now we're seeing some questions that we have about our algebra data and the students who are being accelerated and students who are on grade level. And so our goal in creating these courses was to have multiple pathways.
Which I completely applaud. But are students choosing? Are they deciding, or are they being placed?
There's a recommendation often from the school, sometimes in consultation with the parent, depending on if, sometimes schools may see that they want to move a student, and so that we've encouraged them to meet with the parent and have a conversation about what is best for that child.
And the student.
And the student, but typically, as we move from elementary to middle, it's usually the parent, but sometimes students may be involved as well.
And just on the training piece, which I applaud, what do we do when we have a teacher in this program that's received all this training that leaves suddenly in the middle of the year, goes out on long-term leave? How do we replace that person, and how do we train whomever is coming in to fill that hole?
So one of the things that my office does provide, I would say by request. So any school at any time can reach out to us and ask for support. So in that situation, a school would typically reach out to us to say, we have a substitute teacher or a new teacher coming in, replacing another teacher. Can you all come out and support? And so we do that. We come out, we support more than once, and we do that for any school, even if it's not a new teacher. So if we have even a seasoned teacher in the program that may have a question, they can reach out at any time. So, even if we're not meeting with them during the year as a scheduled meeting, we meet often with schools.
So, but it's not a requirement, it's by request in that circumstance.
Well, in that circumstance, we wouldn't know the teacher's gone unless someone told us. Yeah.
We need some reporting on that. Okay, thank you.
But we do have long-term subs that do participate in a lot of these trainings. I just want to do the last piece around the
Yes,
program
please.
review, was the other piece. Our regulation does call for us to do a formal review every 3 years. And so we do some regular reviews of our APIB, participation in achievement, analysis of our magnet programs, and enriched and accelerated courses. And we also do an analysis of our centers for enriched studies, and we did one for our enriched literacy curriculum when it first started as a pilot. So as we move forward, proposed future evaluations include our primary talent development coaches that are in our Title I schools, and looking at our regional middle school programs. And we are looking to create a cycle of evaluation that we can post and share so that people know which parts of the GT programming we'll be evaluating each year.
I love that.
So that's something that we want to do and make public so that people see the transparency with our evaluation system.
Great idea. Can I make a special request that you please include middle and high school GTLD programs in that? Because I have grave concerns for that program at the middle and high school level.
I have a question for my education and for whoever is watching. I hear two terms often used in the same dialogue. One is gifted and talented education, GT education. One is enriched education. So can you give me some clarification? Are we talking about the same thing or different things here? Thank you.
Yes, we're talking about the same thing. The only thing that I do want to point out that's different is when you hear enrichment and then acceleration. So acceleration is typically a compacted or moving through the curriculum fairly quickly. So the Math 4-5, for example, and Math 5-6, so that would be considered a compacted, accelerated course. Enrichment is going deeper in the learning, and it could be inquiry-based, providing different activities so that students can just acquire a deeper knowledge of a particular topic or skill.
But I will say that we do have a gifted and talented designation for some students. In the second grade begins our process for identification of students. And usually it was at the springtime that teachers begin the process of evaluating students for GT identification. If they are identified, then we need to make sure that we are programming appropriately through enrichment or acceleration opportunities. So there is some overlap. Students don't have to be identified gifted and talented to receive enrichment and acceleration. So we have students that receive it as well, but there is a little bit of overlap.
So I know that you are a small and mighty office, and I think the work is done every day in our classrooms, that teachers have the skill to differentiate, to work with our students. And I think that's what will really help drive our instruction to meet the needs of our students. So any trainings that can provide to our teachers in increasing their capacity and skill in differentiating teaching, I think that will help all our students. Yeah, thank you for your work.
So is that,
I do have, I'm sorry, I thought we were going to do more about the review. Just a quick question. The formal review of the GT programs, Board Policy IOA, Regulation IOA RA, big part of the complaint from the public was around, which was quite specific and detailed, was around the policy, which requires, I'm going to get it right. So, and Ms. Mendrowski also already covered the curriculum piece, which I appreciate, but the assessment process around programs and what the folks that filed the complaint for the Republic around were looking at we are required to routinely monitor and ensure implementation, routinely monitor schools to ensure their various assessments are being used to look at the quality of that, annually monitor the supervision of gifted and talented instruction through the school improvement program, and the formal review of all programs at least every 3 years. So my question is, are we fully back on track to be doing all of these things that the policy requires us to do? And how are we transparently and clearly, publicly sharing that information with our community and the taxpayers who pay for all of this work?
So I know I ran through it very quickly, but we do have some, we have many programs that we just regularly evaluate and post publicly. We have some that are future evaluations that we do want to include, including that primary talent development and our regional middle school programs. And then there are other evaluations around programming. I mean, GT programming, that's huge. It's a lot. So that's why I said we need to get ourselves on a cycle.
Yes.
And publicly share when that will occur. So we have several that we already do and publish, and we will publish the cycle to the public online so that they can see, okay, in 2024, this is what's going to be evaluated and shared publicly. I don't know if you want to share how you publicize.
So as you know, one of the ways that we at least communicate about some of our admission processes is through a board memo. So you all receive information about that, and then that goes on a cycle usually during the toward the end of the year annually. So that's information that you get. But I think that in terms of this, how we define programs varies from the public to also internal staff. So we see through all of our annual publications that we are responding, but we also understand through some discussions with our families and our community that there are other programs they'd like to have evaluated. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about with our teams is getting on that cycle so that we might, for an example, and this is not exactly what we're doing, but an example might be looking at elementary 1 year, and then the next year would be middle school, then the next following year would be high school. But it wouldn't be all of the programs. We would have to pick a few items that really would help inform our work, and so that we can use that to develop it. So then we'd go back on the 4th year to the next cycle, which might be elementary. So that's an example. And so with that will be really helpful for families, and then also for the curriculum teams and our community and our internal staff to plan for as we go forward with our continuous improvement process. So that's one of our ideas.
So a very specific ask from me. So I know that the system is kind of pledging to completely revamp our website. I mean, completely soup to nuts. And my ask is that, the information here, first of all, it's required by board policy. And, we're a public school system, so we have to be accountable. So I'm asking that as that website development happens, that you have a team from your office and some end users, students and families, to make sure that the end product web page for this work is one that is intuitively usable and interactive and is clear. So we require every 3 years formal review of all programs. So that schedule you're talking about is clearly and transparently seen. And if a family member is looking for something, they can't find it, there be an engagement, a link there that they can quickly ask a question or make a suggestion. As you were saying, families say, we'd like to see this or that or the other thing evaluated. But, that could be a hugely important tool to get around the kinds of issues that lead to complaints from the public, and kind of get around the back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. As you said, responses to some questions can lead to more questions. So, but I think a really useful web page for you all could be a huge benefit to everybody. So as that work happens, that's my ask, that you all, that end users, people on the GT committee from MCCPTA, students, be part of the development of that page and the tools, so you end up with a product that is responsive and useful to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so unless any of you have anything else that you'd like to add, I will thank you very much for your work and for your time today, for being here. I want to thank everybody who took the time to watch, and let everyone know that we will continue to dedicate this committee to really working on the issues of our special populations students and their needs. And I hope everyone will watch the next committee meeting on March 30th. So join us, and we look forward to seeing you all again. Have a great day. Adjourned.